Carol Bartlett on the Outreach Committee, and particularly the prisons. Speaking up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm Carol Bartlett on the Outreach Committee and the prison ministry section of that. I'm most active. And Ann Colloton is an old friend of mine with the Georgia Justice Project, and she will tell you more about that, but it has been an angel organization that has cared for people who have previously been incarcerated and cared for them in many ways, and they continue to care for them. So thank you, Ann.
All right, well, thanks for having me. As Carol said, I'm A.M. Colloton, and I'm the Policy and Outreach Coordinator of the Georgia Justice Project. And I guess the pretext of me coming here is that a few people attended the Ending in Mass Incarceration Conference at Ebenezer Baptist Church. I think it was in the fall or the summer. And just were sort of shocked and thinking, well, what can we do about this? This is a problem we need to know about and do something about, because it's a tragic situation. So a little bit about Georgia Justice Project. We were founded 33 years ago by an attorney who is motivated by his faith to help people who are caught up in the system. And we do holistic criminal defense as well as reentry lawyering. So every client is paired with not just an attorney but a social worker who supports them pre-trial in terms of looking at what caused them to get into the situation, and then working with them to address those things, working with an attorney.
Is this a nonprofit?
Yes, a nonprofit. Yeah, we kind of say we're like a private public defender. We work only with people who can't afford an attorney, but we don't take any government funds. Very small caseloads as well. So we follow someone during pre-trial, and then if they are incarcerated, during their stay there, visiting them, bringing their family to visit. And then when they're released, working with them when they're released. And that's how we got to see all the barriers that people face when they are released, that their sentence might be over, but it's really never over. And so we started a landscaping company many years ago because people couldn't get hired by employers because of their background. That closed when the recession hit, but still through that we see the barriers that people face and have done things to expand, which I'll focus more on later, the expungement law in Georgia, because most states allow you to get something off of your record after a period of time. If you've proven that you're not doing that anymore, they say it makes sense to remove those barriers so you can get a job and housing, but Georgia doesn't allow anything like that, so we make it real easy for people to get into the system and very, very difficult for people to ever get out of it. And so that's a little bit about the Georgia Justice Project. So I'll take a step back and just kind of paint a big picture of the United States, a little bit about Georgia, and how we compare, and then talking about our particular focus, which is on expanding expungement and the Second Chance for Georgia campaign. This is a little bit about the United States and what has happened in our prison system, right? A lot of it was driven by the war on drugs and how that changed our rhetoric and how we focused our police resources, how we focused our incarceration, locking up a lot of people who had addiction problems, a lot of people in communities of color where the police were targeting their work. This is another slide that I think just a picture gives you 1,000 words, right? Georgia, way ahead of the United States way ahead of the rest of the world. So, and I don't have a slide about this, but I don't know how many of you have been to the EGI Museum in Montgomery, the Legacy Museum? Okay. If you haven't, that might be a good church field trip if you're talking about prison ministry, to connect our history of slavery to our patterns in incarceration, because especially in the South, you really can't separate those two when you're talking about slavery, and then slavery ended except for as punishment for a crime. And so, and then if you haven't heard about convict leasing, Google that and read about it, and you'll be like, oh my gosh. Yes, so that's a good homework assignment to read more about that. So, who is incarcerated in Georgia, or not just who is in the criminal justice system in Georgia? There's a lot of people who are locked up in prison or in jail, but there's a lot of people on probation as well. And so just because you haven't been locked up doesn't mean you don't have that stamp of a conviction on your criminal record that impacts your ability to move on after that. So Georgia has one of the longest probation sentences in the country. Our average probation sentence is 8 years. Many other states have a maximum probation sentence of 5 years. Sometimes judges will give 80 years probation. So yeah, we're out of the norm in terms of how we use probation. And we also have split sentences, so someone may get 10, serve 2, so they're incarcerated for 2 years and then on probation for another 8. So we're just unique in how we do that. Here's another one. The font is very small, but that's Georgia at the very top of the map. Okay, and these are all the other states. So the blue is the state prison rate. The yellow is the federal prison rate. The green is the parole rate. The orange is the local jail rate. So I think it's like we're third. All right, we're third in the state prison rate, second in jail rate, and then our probation rate is 4 times the national average. So again, this is just saying, we make it really easy in Georgia for people to get into the system and not really easy for people to get out.
Doesn't that cost the state a lot of money?
Well, probation is, yes, absolutely, yes. I mean, I think in people's mind, well, probation is less expensive than incarceration, definitely. But yes, it does cost some people a lot of money. And it costs people who are on, their families who don't have them home working, or people who are on probation trying to work, but they can't because they got to go check in. It's not easy. And the probation fees as well.
And they can't pay the fees, they get to keep
Yeah,
it.
right. So again, you can't talk about the criminal justice system without talking about race. So staggering statistics, I think you can see them visually there. I don't really have to go into them, but we definitely, it's a racist system, no doubt. So again, kind of just looking at the trajectory, 90,000 people are currently incarcerated in the prison or jail in Georgia. When you add any form of correctional control, and by that I mean incarcerated in a jail or a prison or on probation or parole, it's 435,000. And then when you add all that up, the cumulative effect, the number of people who have a criminal record of any kind in Georgia is 4.2 million. So anytime you're arrested and fingerprinted, that means you have a criminal record. Even if your case was dismissed, you still have a criminal record. So that's 40% of adults have some form of a criminal record. So when a background check company does your background check for senior housing or for any kind of a job, student loans, etc., it's going to come up. So that's a lot of people who have a lot of barriers when we're talking about housing and employment. So some of the collateral consequences of having a criminal record, as I said, employment, housing, licensing, in some cases voting. Just to be clear, a lot of times there's confusion. If you have a misdemeanor conviction, you can always vote. If you have a felony conviction, you can't vote when you're under sentence. But as soon as your sentence is done, you can re-register to vote. So some states take that away forever. And when you have a felony conviction in Georgia, as soon as your sentence is over, you can register to vote. So a lot of people are serving a probation sentence under a felony, and they can't vote even if they have that 80-year sentence. Then they can't vote even though they're out and working. Trying to change that. Hello. So the effect on employment is probably the greatest thing. When you have a conviction or even just an arrest on your history, you're 50% less likely to be called back for an interview. If you're a person of color, that rate is even higher and even more of a barrier. So that's why we will talk about our campaign to expand Georgia's expungement law. So as I said earlier, 40 states allow people to move on from a conviction. They say if you haven't been in trouble for X number of years, sometimes it's as soon as your sentence is done, sometimes it's 3 years, 5 years, 10, 20. I mean, some of them aren't really that generous, but it allows some mechanism for things to come off of your record. In Georgia, the only convictions that you can ever remove from your record are certain misdemeanor convictions before you turn 21. So if you were 22, or you had a couple things, or they were a felony. Every drug charge in Georgia is a felony except for possession of marijuana less than an ounce. So it's a lot of, when we hear felonies, there's a lot of things that pop into our mind. There's a lot of things that are felonies that aren't maybe as scary as we think. And so that, as I said, creates a lot of barriers for people. And so here's another example, even in the southern states, Mississippi, we never like to be behind Mississippi, but we are. So a lot of other states have mechanisms to remove things from people's records. So the solution to that is to bring us more in line with the other states, right, that allow things to come off people's records. So in 2013, there was even a Senate study committee that said we should allow automatic restriction of convictions. In 2018, I know Governor Deal, who really did a lot to reform our criminal justice system in Georgia, they recommend that as well. And so we're trying to work again to make that happen. This year, we feel like there's a lot of momentum. There's 6 bills introduced that would expand expungement, and we have a campaign that the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta is one of the campaign partners. There's over 65 different nonprofits and faith communities who have endorsed the campaign, saying this makes sense. It makes sense in terms of redemption, that people have the ability to change. People should get a clean slate at some point, not be held, their mistakes shouldn't be held against them for the rest of their lives. And then there's business groups and others that say this makes sense from a public safety perspective, of a workforce perspective. Georgia is having a hard time filling their open positions in the state, and so this would allow people to be hired more easily. It would allow companies to hire people without liability concerns. So it's kind of a win-win all around. And I think research also shows that when people are working, they're less likely to commit a crime, and so it increases public safety as well. It's not about hiding things from people. It's just saying someone has already demonstrated that they aren't committing any more crimes, that they should be allowed to work and find a place for their family. So if you're into data, you can look up there. There's also handouts out here that give some of the data about how expanding expungement increases people's ability to work. So if your wages went up 22%, that's a huge impact on your family, right? Your ability to, or more than $6,000 a year. Oops, I went backwards, sorry. Again, it helps companies fill open positions. And it increases public safety. 62% reduction in recidivism for people who have a job. So the Georgia Justice Project has the campaign, as I said, reaching out to a lot of different constituencies about how this makes sense from so many different perspectives. And so this is our legislative proposal that we hope will be introduced this week, or that we hear is going to be introduced this week. As I said, there's 5 other bills, or 6 other bills now. I think all but one of them were introduced by a Democrat, which in Georgia often means that it won't go anywhere. And one was introduced by a Republican that got a hearing last year, but did not go anywhere. And so our proposal is expanding what was, as I mentioned before, if you're under 21 and have a certain misdemeanor conviction, that after 5 years after the completion of your sentence, you're eligible to have that record restricted and sealed. And so this would be removing the age limit, saying that anyone who has a misdemeanor conviction, if you've gone 4 years from the date of when you were convicted, then that should be able to be restricted. And we're saying that should be automatically restricted with a computer query by GCIC, which is the Georgia Crime Information Center. Because even trying to remove non-convictions, which is what is eligible now for a restriction, is a very confusing, very time-consuming, can be potentially very expensive process to apply. You pay $25 and get your record, submit it to the arresting agency. Then the arresting agency has to do something with it and pass it to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor has to do something and pass it back to you, and then you have to send it to the GCIC, and then you have to do something with the jail records, and then it's not easy. And so if it could be automatically restricted with a computer query, a lot more people would benefit from that without having to jump through all those hoops. And then the all those agencies, all the judicial partners wouldn't have to be pushing thousands of people's paperwork through their process. So, and same with felony convictions. From what we heard, people aren't comfortable yet with having that automated. They still want to review each one at a time, but so it'll still have that petition-based process for the felonies. Just a few points of just the clarifications. When something, and we use the word expungement, and just to clarify what that means, in Georgia it's a two-step process. There's restricting the record in the GCIC database, and then there's sealing the courthouse records at the courthouse. And so the restriction can happen automatically. It can, if the law passes, it can be done automatically. The sealing still has to be done with a petition because Georgia has 159 counties. Each county might have 1 or 2 or 3 different courts. None of them are linked. They all have their own databases, and some don't even have a database. Some just have boxes of paper in some file drawers or some warehouse somewhere. And so that process can't be automated at this point because they're not communicating with each other. But whenever something is restricted and or sealed, it is always available to law enforcement. So again, this is not trying to hide things. It's always available to prosecutors, to the police on the street who are doing any arrests. They'll always see that. It's just a matter of removing old things from the public record so that someone can get a job.
And have you seen that someone who's been through that process and then they have another misdemeanor?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any consequences?
What do you mean?
They take that into account in the next trial or the next...
Definitely, yes. That's always brought up, is the history. So again, like I said, even if you were able to get things restricted and sealed, they would always still bring that up. Yeah. And also just to clarify too, so the knee-jerk reaction is you're trying to get a child molester to work in my children's daycare. Okay, 2 things. Child molestation would never be eligible for restriction and sealing. So we have what's called the First Offender Act, right? If you have 1 conviction, you can, instead of that, if that was your first conviction or first arrest for a felony, then your lawyer can say, I want this person to be sentenced under the First Offender Act. And then if you successfully complete the sentence, whatever you're charged with, whatever you're sentenced to, and you can successfully complete that, then you can have that restricted and sealed. It wouldn't even be considered a conviction. So under that law, which has been on the books since the 1960s, certain things are excluded. So the 7 deadly sins, rape, murder, armed robbery, some other things. So those are never eligible for expungement under our proposal. Neither are serious sex crimes, crimes against children, crimes against the elderly. So, and then the other thing to say, if someone is applying for a job that has a high security clearance, let's say you're going to work with a nuclear power plant, or for the Delta Airlines, or one of those that has a higher security clearance, or you're applying to work with at a nursing home or a daycare center, those background checks have a whole different set of criteria for what they see and what they don't see. And so things that are restricted and sealed that are relevant to those would still be seen by those employers. So again, this is just saying if you're applying to work at Walmart and you have, disorderly conduct that, from 10 years ago, that it shouldn't be taken into account. So the Second Chance for Georgia campaign, I have a lot of information over there. As I said, the Episcopal Diocese is one of our partners. A lot of other nonprofits ranging across the political spectrum, and about 900 people. So what you can do, if you're interested in this and would like to help us change the law, we have a website, and you can either sign up on that website or sign up on this sheet of paper to get action alerts, and we will say, there's a hearing coming up, please call these legislators, or please call your legislator. If you are part of another nonprofit besides your church that would like to endorse the campaign, that would be great too. if you know people with a criminal record, or if yourself has a criminal record and you can talk about the barriers that you face, we think that talking about data saying 4.2 million people have a criminal record is a powerful number, but also is, this is how it's affected me, this is how it's affected my family. So we're asking people to do that as well. Second Chance at the Capitol is February 11th. That's an advocacy day to speak to legislators about that. And also Justice Day at the Capitol on February 27th, which is with a larger group of other nonprofits, and it focuses not just on the expungement law, but a lot of different criminal justice issues. And one thing, if you're interested, on the Second Chance Georgia website, and if you're Googling it, put in the .org, because if you just Google Second Chance Georgia, you'll get all about the Georgia lottery. But if you put the .org, you'll get our campaign. But on the website, you under the Take Action drop-down box, there's things about writing a letter to the editor. And there's 4 template letters that you can look at, written from different perspectives. If you're more of a business-minded person, you want to talk about the economic impact. You want to talk about redemption in the faith perspective, there's one about that. If you have a personal story to tell, there's one like that. So there's different perspectives you can pick and choose, but it makes it quite easy, I think, including the email addresses and ways to post those to different newspapers. So that's something else that you could do. You can even do it as a group if you want to have a letter writing night or letter writing morning with the church as well. So I think that was it before questions. Yep.
I know about Ban the Box,
Mhm.
and I think Decatur has done Ban the Box.
Mhm.
Would you explain Ban the Box and maybe how that meshes with this?
Sure. Ban the Box is something that says on a job application that instead of having, have you ever been convicted of a crime, or have you ever been arrested for a crime, or have you ever been arrested for a felony? There's a lot of different ways that question can be asked, but sometimes you have to check yes, right? And the idea of Ban the Box is that box that you have to check would not be on your initial job application, that they can still ask you about it, but you would be asked about it later in the process after you've been able to have a conversation and talk about who you are and your qualifications, and then at the point where they want to offer you a job, then they could do a background check. So certain cities and certain states have done that for their government positions. So the state of Georgia has banned the box for state jobs. Again, it still means they can ask later, and certain cities have done that for city jobs. It has no effect at all on any private companies. So private companies in Georgia can still do whatever they feel comfortable with doing. And I think that helps in a lot of ways. I think it's can be a good step in the right direction, because it doesn't eliminate people immediately. They don't automatically, get their application thrown in the trash. But it's still, I know a lot of people who they get hired, they go to training, and then 2 weeks after they get fired. And so sometimes that is a matter of the company changing their internal HR policies to say, well, this person's great, we thought they're great, do we have to look at this? And some companies are being more flexible with how they look at that. And some, though, the problem is that their HR policies are based on trends across the country. It's a national company, for example. They see 40 states allow expungement, 40 states don't have anything after a certain number of years. Anything that's old is gone. So if it's still there in Georgia, they're like, oh, still there, disqualified. But that same person could get hired by a different branch of that company in another state. So that's the problem, and trying to explain that to the local HR people, they get it, but their policies, you're trying to deal with the corporate bureaucracy, they can't be flexible on that. And a lot of it comes down to liability concerns. And I think research shows that if somebody has gone a number of years, then they're no more likely to commit a crime than anyone else in the general population. But it's a matter of changing HR policies, and which is definitely something that is happening. But thousands and thousands and thousands of companies are in Georgia. So if the legislature could do something that would remove those old charges that they really don't want to look at anyways, don't really care about anyways, and that it would remove that liability concern, which is the issue, then I think that would benefit the companies. And when we talk to the companies, That's what they tell us, that if the legislature could remove some of those old ones, then we don't have so many people in that middle pile that we have to, we have the no criminal record will hire you, crimes that are related to our work, if you have several DUIs, for example, and we're a driving company, you're out of that. But they have this middle box, and they're saying if more people could have the old things removed to put into the yes pile, then we can spend our time focusing on the things that matter in the middle. Any other questions? Yep.
Can you give us an idea what the timeline would be on this legislation that you proposed?
Well, the session goes through the end of March or the beginning of April, so it should, from what we hear, it be introduced. Our bill will be introduced this week, but there's 6 other bills. So, but I mean, we've done a lot of vetting with that, a lot of vetting with prosecutors, with judges, with other legislators, the lieutenant governor, the governor's office. So we've gotten pretty good feedback that it's going to be heard in the subcommittee, and then hopefully the committee and the floor and all that. So I don't know exactly the time frame, but I'm feeling pretty good that it would be happening in the next month. Yeah, moving along quickly. So, yep.
When you were talking about petitioning,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about to get your record expunged.
Mm-hmm.
Each person would have to petition if they wanted a job.
Yeah, well, right now you can petition to have an arrest record removed. So if you have an arrest that was dismissed or it was never, or you were acquitted of it, you have to petition to get that removed.
So it's on a one-by-one basis.
On a one-by-one basis. Well, if it was before 2013, after 2013, things that didn't result in a conviction are supposed to be automatically restricted. Doesn't always happen. The data doesn't always translate from the arresting to the prosecutor to the clerk to the GCIC. So there's a lot of missing data at GCIC. I think like 30 to 40% is missing. And so you can't always just automatically restrict it because it's sort of open. They are missing the disposition of the case. And so that makes it difficult to automate it because they don't know what happened with it. But yeah, so typically people have to go through that petition process. Our bill would say that misdemeanors, 4 years after the date of conviction, will be automatically restricted. And then felonies, you would still have to petition to do that.
And I guess there's legal costs for each petition, right?
Yep. Yeah, there's money a fee that people have to pay, and then there's a lot of time by each of the agencies involved. Yeah, so it's a burdensome process. So, yeah. Yep.
I'm just curious, do you guys do work to decriminalize certain activities?
Yes, our office right now is focused more on this. I mean, decriminalize, you talking about like quality of life crimes or possession of marijuana or particular? Both, yeah. Our office is involved in sort of some coalitions that are looking at that for sure. I don't know if you know, like the Atlanta City Detention Center is in the process of being closed down because most of the people in the Atlanta City Detention Center now are there for quality of life crimes, for sleeping on the street, for peeing on the sidewalk, for panhandling, things that are caused by mental health issues or addiction issues or poverty issues. And so there's a trend to definitely decriminalize a lot of those city ordinances. What we hope is that they don't then charge them with a misdemeanor and get sent to the Fulton County Jail, that they would actually decriminalize and divert people to services instead. But there are. And there is, if you go to justiceaid365.com, there's a series of Talk Justice Tuesdays during the legislative session. And I can't remember, it's this Tuesday, but one of the ones coming up is on decriminalization of minor offenses. So if you're looking, look at that. Yes?
Can you tell us of organizations, maybe including you, that provide mentoring or coaching to people who have criminal records who are trying to get a job, about how to do it?
Yep, we have what we call a First Friday. So every first Friday of every month, we do a presentation on what the law is and what's eligible to be restricted and sealed under the current law. and also talk about that, yeah, how you explain your record to an employer and what to do, what not to do. We have lots of materials, sample letters that they can use for that. I think there are a lot of re-entry, nonprofits that work with returning citizens. I'm thinking Georgia Works is one. I mean, they have jobs right there because they know that it's difficult for people to get a job. But that's another one that I can think of off the top of my head that does great work. Yes?
What is your view on the other 6 bills? Are there significant differences, or?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of, conceptually I agree with all of them. Some of them are sort of like, we should automatically restrict every conviction after X years, period, just done. Which I think could be really great. I don't think it's really politically realistic for some of those to happen. And again, the politics of who the sponsor is a thing. The one bill that did get a hearing last year, again, conceptually I like, but practically speaking, how it was defined of what's eligible was not real easy. It said any crime that had a potential sentence of 20 years or more would not be eligible. But so if somebody says, well, I got 3 years, so they think they're eligible, but the potential sentence is 20 years, or if a judge or prosecutor is trying to review, is this charge eligible or not, they have to go to the code, look up 20 years, what's up. And then of course sentencing can change, and so what's 20 years now versus 20 years before, so it wasn't really easily definable. And because our office day in, day out, thousands of people every year, we're negotiating through this petition process. We know what works and what doesn't and what really needs to be in that law to make it implementable. Of course, I think our bill is the best, but again, any of them would be a step in the right direction, but I think just practically speaking,
And who presented your
I don't know if I can be 100% public about that yet. If you sign up for our email, I will certainly let you know. But it's a Republican, a non-Metro Atlanta Republican, which I think gives us a very good shot.
That's fantastic. I actually benefited from the expungement.
Mm-hmm.
I was arrested when I was in my 20s, which was back in the 70s, for drug possession.
Mm-hmm.
I was into growing plants at the time in my home, and I thought the marijuana plant was really beautiful. And, it's prettier than the false Aurelia. And the people in the parking lot, I guess they noticed it. And so, I got arrested by the narcotics agents, went downtown, fingerprinted, the whole bit. My dad was not pleased when he came to pick me up. And I went through the Offenders Aid and Restoration Program. I was on probation for 6 months. And for me, it was just an inconvenience, just a hiccup. It wasn't serious. I wasn't a drug user. And I look back, did anyone see this documentary about this woman who's a comedian out of Florida? She's very popular. She did a narration of her life where she had a boyfriend who was black at one time. And he went down the path of crime and ended up in prison. And she was with him when he was arrested. And they said, going home now, going home, And I wonder, for me, it was just an inconvenience. And it never affected my record. I never had to claim it. I was able to get, a license to go to sea. Through the Coast Guard system, it never affected me, and I think, what kind of white privilege is that? When I look back on it, it's funny to laugh at it. I make jokes about it, but could someone of color do the same thing in Virginia during the 70s? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I mean, at every point during the criminal justice system, there is bias. And who gets arrested, what you're charged with, if you're given bail, how you're sentenced, if you're given a diversion opportunity or not, how long the sentence is. And then if you're looking for a job, do they perceive that? That's one thing people say about potentially about ban the boxes. They assume if they can tell, maybe by your name or whatever, if you're white or black, if there is no box, they kind of assume that a person of color has a criminal record. They assume that a white person doesn't, and it can
Recently, I signed up for I was called in for jury duty, and they had us all together in the room, and they said, who has been arrested? Well, I raised my hand, as did probably 30% of the group. And then they said, what were you arrested for? And you had to say it out loud. And I thought that was like, and I had to say drug possession. It's
Yeah, when I've been talking with people, part of our campaign, as I said, is to have stories about how this impacts people. And when I have talked to people who are white, they say, I was really lucky. Somebody gave me a second chance. I got hired by this company, and I've been able to do these things. And so they're saying it could be a lot worse, and I know other people for whom it's a lot worse. They were given a second chance, and they can. But I mean, by that company, they still aren't sure if they left that company, went to another one, if they would be able to do it. But the African American people I talk to have not always been given that opportunity, and so it definitely makes it harder. And the white people who have been, they're more willing to also tell their story publicly. And a person of color is not as comfortable doing that because I think they know that there's already bias and discrimination that they face, and so they don't want their face in public about that as well. So definitely. And one other thing I'll bring up that I may have mentioned earlier, but one of the, besides employment, which is a big one, we have people who are coming in applying for senior housing who have a conviction from 40 years ago who are turned down for senior housing because of something like that. So this is really a problem for young people who are trying to work and for seniors who say, this is not who I am, This is, it's a long-term problem.